It's the intel about the next generation of Bulldogs. This is Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger.
Let's go, I'm a Bulldog.
Hello, DawgNation, and welcome into Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger. I'm Kaylee Mansell with DawgNation recruiting insider Sentell. Because of breaking news this morning, we have so much to get to in the show today, but we thought we'd start with something a little bit lighthearted. Every now and then, Jeff and I will see something on social media that we think needs to be shared. I feel like this is a good way to start off the show. This comes from the Instagram of one of Georgia's top targets. That's Preston J. Carey, who posted this the other day about how he's worn a blazer or a suit to every visit since he got his first full scholarship in the 8th grade and started to get recruited. And then because of this, he's now been able to get a deal with a tuxedo company. It's funny because he actually used a picture of him and Kirby Smart for the post. I feel like that's so rare nowadays that you see a recruit that always comes dressed to the nines.
I think it's really cool, Kaylee. And I think what do we know is a good story. What do we know is a good segment or some good content. When you see something like that, because I haven't seen anything quite like that. First of all, folks, this is a 6'5", 315-pound dude. I bet Kirby's expression, if we could have clicked on live mode on that photo, he would be like, "Daggum, I'm not used to seeing this at all." He looks like the bouncer to a club in like Jersey or something like that. And, you know, first of all, this guy, it's one of those guys, every time I talk to him, there's something in his caption right here where he talks about how it's a great way to make a first impression. And Kaylee, I've talked to this young man several times. I'm guilty of not writing about him enough because there's a really good story here and just a really good, really well-composed young man. He is exactly like the type of kid who would post this on his Instagram about wearing a suit. You can get it at a thrift shop. You can get it an old hand-me-down. He's the type of kid that would wear a suit like this and post like this on his official. Let's also be real. He's got an NIL deal of sorts now working here with a tuxedo shop. Now, is this one of those gargantuan break the banks? No. But I think this is the way NIL should work. The young man using his name and likeness, a decent, mid four-star recruit. And he's going to use his name and likeness to get a tuxedo now for every one of his remaining officials. And save the date. He's a June 30th commitment date, and the Dogs are really in that one.
Well, I think you make a really good point about the fact that it is such a good impression, and maybe the generation that I'm a part of can take some guilt in this, where I just feel like we don't dress up for things nearly as much anymore. It's all about comfort. So to see a kid who really wants to make a good impression and uses his clothing as a reflection of who he is, I could see why he would make such a great impression on coaches.
So you dress up what now, for weddings or big commitments or something like that? What does your generation dress up for?
Well, okay, so my life is different because I have to come in here and film so many days a week. But if I am not here, chances are I'm probably not dressed up.
There you go.
All right, enough about fashion. We'll go ahead and get started with today's show. Again, so much to talk about. Of course, we're going to start it off with Georgia's latest commit that happened this morning, the 4-star athlete Ryan Mosley. Everything you need to know about him. We're officially in the era of official visitors list. We've got a lot of official visitors for you this weekend, so we'll try to go through those pretty quick. And then now that Jackson Cantwell is not a part of the picture for Georgia, can Georgia still acquire the #1 recruiting class for the class of 2026? And who are the guys they absolutely have to get to that point? Then we will continue our next generation series all about the class of 2025 signees. We've got another 5-star in store for you today with Zayden Walker. But first, breaking news off the top this morning. We actually had a whole show planned, and then you get a commit and you have to revise some things. But it's always cool when we get to talk about a new guy on the show. We'll show you the commitment graphic here. Ryan Mosley, the 4-star athlete. Georgia's going to have him as a wide receiver out of Carrollton, Georgia. Now, he can play both ways. Listed as a wide receiver, what do you expect his role for Georgia to be, and what kind of separates his skill set from other athletes in the class?
Yeah, first of all, like that graphic, the Georgia creative team is still on its game for this cycle. But the one thing I don't think he can play is the electric guitar that's in that edit. But so he was initially rated as like an athlete for the services, and now he's kind of landed at wide receiver, Kaylee. But here's the intrigue here, and perhaps I think it's a nod to being very thrifty with your roster in terms of, you're going to add a player. Can this guy play both ways? Well, Ryan was legitimately, Kaylee, in a way that I really haven't heard before from a recruit, besides like the Travis Hunters of the world. But like Georgia has a plan where he's been priority recruit. He's been a priority recruit for Tavares Robinson, the safeties coach, and also James Coley, the wide receivers coach. And here's the plan. The plan is for him to be a receiver primarily. But then on third down, nickel packages, basically what I refer to as when the offense is in deep water and has to throw it, they feel he can be a cover the whole field type rangy free safety. 6'4", 205 pounds. And that has been the pitch from Georgia to Ryan. And there's so many great things about this story, but that's the first thing you got to think about. This is a guy who is legitimately being recruited by both coaches, two different coaches on different sides of the ball at Georgia. And folks, just take a quick second here to think about this. This is a guy that Georgia deems good enough to be both a wide receiver and a safety in the SEC. You see these highlights here. He's playing for one of the biggest of big boy programs in the state of Georgia, and that is the Carrollton High Trojans.
Well, it's funny because whenever I saw the graphic go up this morning on our DawgNation socials, the first thing that I thought about was when you and I went to Nashville and we spoke with Jared Curtis, and he talked about one of the guys that he wanted to go get immediately was Ryan Mosley. So it makes me wonder, did Jared Curtis play any role in this, or has Ryan Mosley always kind of been tied to the Dogs?
I think he has. I think we can kind of talk about this now, Kaylee. Like Jared was trying to tout the company line without telling the company line what was going on. Ryan, according to my information, has been a silent for Georgia for like kind of several months now, a couple of months now. And I guess the only intrigue left is, will he still take any other official visits? He took his official visit to Georgia for the scavenger hunt weekend. So Georgia got a cha-ching, or Georgia got a big boom out of that weekend already. But for him, he liked South Carolina. He liked Nebraska, Texas A&M, Alabama was also in the mix. And he told me after his official visit that I was like, hey, did the Dogs try to get you to shut it down? And he's like, yeah, they did. They would really like it if I shut it down. And he said, that's something I'm still really thinking about right now, whether or not he's going to shut it down. But he makes the public commitment. I believe that Jared already knew he would get to play with Ryan when he made those statements in Nashville, or he just heard from the coaches that Ryan was really high up on the board, and you should talk to him and help recruit him as well. But, Kaylee, this is one thing we try to keep all these things in perspective. We do these top targets each and every week, Kaylee. I believe Ryan Mosley's, since you're the caretaker of the top targets list these days, I believe he was number 4 that just came off the board, or was he number 5? So that's a big one for the Dogs today. Homegrown, home state dog, Ryan Mosley.
Well, as you mentioned, home state kid plays for an absolute power program in Carrollton, but that is one of the advantages that Georgia has with in-state kids, is that you've always kind of got that tie, or maybe their family rooted for Georgia growing up, or just simply the fact that you can be closer to them. But I think this picture that we're going to show you here on the screen is really great evidence of the advantages that Georgia's always had. If you're listening on our podcast, it is Ryan Mosley as a kid, which, by the way, he kind of also looks like a grown man in this picture.
Yeah, he does.
With a Herschel Walker jersey on. And so in looking at this, I think that you can kind of get a better sense of the love that Ryan Mosley's had for Georgia. We're going to let you listen to this clip from earlier this year, and I want you to pay attention to what he says about Kirby Smart here.
They say you can play some wide receiver, and then in third down, when they're in some deep water, you can go. Like, what goes through your mind when they say you can do both like that, man?
I'll be like, it's crazy, being a big guy that can play a DB, a receiver, and just do your thing out there. That's being crazy. Just being recruited by top schools to play both sides of the ball. Kind of love also.
What do you like best about Georgia? What sticks out?
I love Kirby. I love Kirby. I love the coaches, the environment, the fans, everything.
How would you describe your game, both sides of the ball?
A game, being, I'd say DK Metcalf, being that guy that can run routes, run by you, go up, and just, getting the first down, getting the fourth down if I need it. So at safety, just being that guy that can cover half the field, the whole field is needed. Being that guy that can come down and hit you.
It's crazy now because we're getting into these recruiting classes where a lot of these guys were just kids when Kirby Smart took over the Georgia program, and they've seen some of the more successful programs that Georgia's had under Kirby Smart. So I thought it was really interesting that when you asked what he loved about Georgia, the first thing that he points to is Kirby Smart.
Just love Kirby, man. And first of all, I'm gonna point to you, doubter, contrarian, out there about recruiting and NIL, and it's all the bag and it's how much money. Kaylee made a great point. Most of these kids were probably 9 years old when Kirby took over at Georgia now, or 8 years old when he took over at Georgia in December of 2015. But when a guy says he loves Kirby, and when we know, according to our information, he's being prioritized by the Dawgs, and then we can go back to this photo. Again, look at this, guys. I don't know whether this is a youth league photo or this is just he dressed up as Georgia because he had a Georgia outfit. Looks like it's youth league because he's got the pads on. He's got the Georgia G on his hip pocket, and he's also got his G underneath the neckline right there on the pads.
But his pants aren't dirty.
They aren't dirty. It's probably before the game because otherwise you could say nobody could catch or touch Ryan Mosley, and that's why his pants aren't dirty. But when Georgia starts losing recruits like that, ones that love Kirby and the ones that rock the G like that and grew up loving the Dawgs, then we got a problem before the hedges. But until then, this is one of those I think we'll look back on as one of the probably easily the 10 biggest commitments of this class.
Jeff really just went straight Uncle Sam
I
mode on all of you guys. All right, well, that's going to wrap up our conversation on Georgia's latest commit, the 4-star wide receiver, Ryan Mosley. And in just a moment, we're going to go through all of the official visitors for this weekend at Georgia. It is a long list. We have so much to get to. But first, we want to remind you that here on Before the Hedges, we are brought to you by Kroger, and we are in that social season when I feel like there's something different going on every single weekend, and you need to be able to maximize your time, and you can do that by signing up for Kroger Boost. You can try it now free for 30 days, and with that, you can save up to $1,000 per year with 2 times the fuel points. And the thing that is the most beneficial, and once you do it, it's so hard to go back to the normal way of grocery shopping, you get that free grocery delivery so you can give more time back to yourself, and with Kroger, you can do that. So you can sign up right now at Kroger.com/boost. Again, that's Kroger.com/boost. We got a lot of guys to get to, but before we do that, let's just kind of get a general idea of what this week looks like. This weekend, is it another repeat of scavenger hunt?
Well, first of all, they won't be chasing Georgia coaches and golf carts around campus. This is the traditional OV season, and if we're being honest, May 30th has usually been the weekend where they want to bring in all the absolute major dudes. It's kind of evolved a little bit this year because a lot of the commitments are going to be on other weekends, including Jared Curtis. But it used to be in the past that May 30th weekend was when the Oscar Delps, the Gunnar Stocktons, even the Arch Mannings, the Dylan Raiolas, the Ellis Robinsons, all those guys came in on the very first weekend of OVs that they could. And, that's evolved a little bit. But you look at these names, Kaylee, and, I'll wait and give the perfect framing around this as we go through the names. But you look at these names, it is definitely a contender for making this weekend the most loaded weekend of official visitors the Dawgs will have. I mean, I kind of look at this list right now, Kaylee, and I think there's probably at least 7 to 9 guys that Georgia needs to sign out of this class, out of this weekend's recruiting group. And Kaylee, there's probably, dipping into easily double digits, maybe even more than 15 names here to look at.
All right, well, we've got 16 to show you, so we'll go ahead and start right now. One person that I immediately recognize is the 4-star edge, Kamari Brooks, who currently ranks at number 4 on our top target list. But you also have guys like the 4-star offensive tackle, Chris Booker, who's currently a Bama commit, and the 4-star wide receiver, Devin Carter, who's an Auburn commit but is an in-state guy. Who are some of the guys on this first page that Georgia needs to lock in on, or they've got a lot of catching up to do?
Yeah, we can kind of reference all these names here as a guy that Georgia should sign, wants to sign, or maybe that they're playing catch up, or they're going to be what a lot of folks in the biz call a hat on the table eventually in all this. Kaylee, there's probably, if you look at an early easy headliner, you got to mention Kamari, who you just talked about right there. Really, that guy's coming down to Alabama and Georgia. Below him, Devin Carter is a recruit. I don't think Georgia, especially now with 3 commitments at wide receiver and then 2 more they really, really want. Chancellor Campbell is a name that we're going to have a thought or two to share in a little bit in a minute. But, Booker's a guy that, he's committed to Bama, Kaylee. Booker's a guy that, Georgia really needs to. I don't want to say they're going to flip him this weekend because I don't think that's possible. But this one really needs to resonate and move the dial with Booker, who's one of the very few in-state OLs that Georgia's going after. And above all that, he's also a tackle, which elevates that even further.
All right, we'll take a look at the next page of visitors. This one's going to have a lot of names that you're going to recognize. I noticed 3 guys that are currently on the top targets list. You've got the 5-star tight end Caden Prothro, 4-star wide receiver Craig Dandridge, who actually moves up into the top targets list this week, as well as the 4-star cornerback Peyton Dyer. I feel like Georgia and Caden Prothro have kind of been sitting still for a while. Could this be the finally the weekend that pushes that commitment over the edge?
I think he's going to wait a little bit longer. I don't know if he's going to pull a Mosley here and drop the mic after this weekend's official. But you look at Prothro. For me, there's really 2 names here to look at that I would say are probably the names that are, well, you would say are the headliners or the most important recruits. You've got Kamari Brooks here. Obviously, you've got Prothro as well. Prothro is I feel like one of the few remaining 5-stars. Here's this point. We wrote about this week on DawgNation. Kaylee, there's 17 remaining uncommitted 5-stars, and Georgia's really only in it to win it with only 5 more of those. Prothro is one of those. Mark Bowman is one of those. Tyler Atkinson is one of those, and also the 2 running backs, Derek Cooper and Savion Hyder. But you keep looking at this list. Xavier Crowell is a guy. He reclassified. He's just outside the 5-star status. He's a running back in Alabama. Really sounds like he's going to roll tide there. Tico Crittenton is another name that Georgia's kind of jockeying for, trying to figure out, is he a take? Is he a guy that probably needs to camp in June and really figure out how much his worth is? But this wouldn't be a Before the Hedges segment, Kaylee, where I don't make sure and stop myself and sing the praises of Craig Dandridge. This is the young man at Cambridge High School. He had a monster junior season. He just dropped his final 6. Georgia made his final 6. This is a huge weekend for the Dogs with Craig Dandridge. And also you gotta bring up the name Peyton Man Dyer here as well out of Duluth. I think he is the number 1 cornerback that Georgia wants to sign in this class.
Wow, and again, he'll come up later in our show. We've got another page of visitors. So with this list, I'm looking at a lot of needs for Georgia. Of course, Graham Houston is an interior offensive lineman that Georgia has signed, but you got to get another one. You could do that with Zyke Helton, who is also out of Carrollton. I'm sure Ryan Mosley is going to be doing some work on him. But then you've got someone like Carter Lucky, who's probably more familiar with the Georgia program as a recruit than anyone else because of who his brother is. Georgia really needs some defensive linemen in this class. And then with a last name like Fitzpatrick, that's obviously going to raise some eyebrows. Justice Fitzpatrick, the 4-star cornerback, who is the brother Minka Fitzpatrick. So I'm looking at this group in particular, just based on position, a lot of needs.
Yeah, that's a good point. Good way to look at it. Lucky's a legacy. I think Georgia is probably the school to beat there for Carter. I think Georgia kind of really needs to move the dial and maybe seize kind of some of the momentum there with Justice. I think this is going to be vital. I think this needs to be, Georgia's visits are all home runs for these guys, but I think it needs to be one of those Shohei type home runs or a Freddie Freeman World Series type home runs for Justice, for the Dogs to really, kind of separate themselves from that top 3, maybe to the top 1, top 2. Desmond Green is interesting because, Kelly, be honest, for the longest time, I thought he might already be committed to Georgia by now. He's a 4.4 GPA kid, but he's kind of wavered a little bit. And I know if some of that has to do whether the offer is committable, but he's a 4.4 GPA. He's been to Georgia. Kaylee, he was at Georgia for the scavenger hunt weekend just 2 weekends ago. He was at Georgia multiple times last year. I think he almost went like 3 or 4 weekends in a row, 3 or 4 games in a row. So, Zyke's another guy where you look at him and he's lost a lot of weight. He's a former Alabama commitment. And the biggest thing with Zyke is just he lost a lot of weight between his seasons, and he needs to get up to that 290 threshold for him to be, I believe, a take for the Dawgs. And, a lot of names here, Kaylee. And, one way to look at that, the month of June, folks, is Georgia will probably host 85% of its official visitors for the whole class on this specific weekend. Like they've had some weekends, they hosted some for G-Day. They hosted a lot for the scavenger hunt, but this is kind of where it really gets serious.
All right, well, we've got one last page for you. This one does feature a Georgia commit, the 4-star safety, Jordan Smith. One person I want to check in on is 4-star defensive lineman James Johnson. Has there been any lost touch with him in Georgia? Could this help solidify his stance with the Dawgs?
Yeah, James J.J. Johnson, who I think On3 has as their number 1 defensive lineman in the country. He said Georgia was his leader coming out of his January unofficial visit. And now it's gotten murky with James. He's transferred schools. Texas has gotten involved. Miami is really the backyard school for him, and they're hitting him up hard. And we know Miami is going to find some more than just spare change in the couch cushions to really prioritize James Johnson.
I know,
so
that's right.
That's one of those things where I think, Georgia used to be in a great spot with James Johnson. I think they're now just in an okay spot. Cedarian Morgan, Kaylee, I'll be honest, this guy's from Alabama, plays for Benjamin Russell High School. That's the school which produced Terrell Owens. He's a 5-star. He's actually going to play on the same, funny thing how convergence of pop culture and college football recruiting here. He's actually going to play on the same 7-on-7 team at the end of June with Jared Curtis. He's a 5-star, but we've never had him on the top targets list or even just off the list for a reason. But Jared Curtis and Cedarian Morgan are going to play for a team which is backed by Rod Wave, of all people. Yeah, I know it.
I was not ready for that.
The Kaylee cam here, I might as well have just said something else. I
didn't know where that was going.
Yeah, but so there's going to be a chance for Cedarian and Jared to talk. Maybe he can see that big arm and everything else. But one other name I want to flash on that list, I want to tell you, I'm sure Isaiah Williams, this linebacker here, who's been rated by one of the services as the number 1 linebacker in the country. Folks, he might even commit to Georgia this weekend because literally he's literally the guy that loves every school he visits. Kaylee, I think he's been on fourth or fifth high school. And I think he's now on his 4th or 5th commitment. He was once committed to Miami, then he was committed to Florida, then he flipped to Ole Miss. So there's a lot of visit highs that he just acts upon right now. Like it's one of those things. My wife and I are currently watching the 1883 streaming show.
Yeah.
And like there's one of the main characters in there. She's basically falling in love with every guy she meets in every state.
I have friends like that.
Yeah. So it's kind of, Mr. Williams, talented player, really good football player, but he loves him some commitments. Let's just say that.
So in case there is an Isaiah Williams to Georgia commitment this weekend, nobody should get too excited just yet. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, wait till the papers are dry on that.
Right. Okay. Well, out of everybody that we just talked about, if you could pinpoint who are the 2 most important visitors for Georgia this weekend, who would you say?
Yeah, I would accept. You know how your teacher maybe in college would say I would accept full credit for one of 2 answers.
Yes.
I think Kamari Brooks. I can give a great testify right here about why I think it's Kamari Brooks. David Pollock said he's one of the most brilliant football players or brilliant people he's ever been around. Kaylee, he's got more rings than the average suburban mom's Apple Watch from working out all the time, from closing their rings. He's got 2 basketball rings, state titles. He's got a football state title ring. He's probably going to win another one at North Oconee this next year. It's either him or Prothrow, but it's one of those guys that Georgia has to clock in and do really good work with those guys. But, the other thing there is, if you want to say Peyton Dyer, I wouldn't consider that as much a radical because I already know it seems to me like Georgia is in a mighty good spot with both Brooks and also Prothrow. For Georgia, I think they need to just build up a lead with these young men, whether it becomes public or it remains private. They need to build up a lead between them and some other really good programs that are chasing both of those guys. And really with Brooks, it's basically Alabama. So it's everybody loves a head-to-head competition with the Tide, and that's what Georgia has with Kamari.
Well, I'm glad you bring up Caden Prothro because he's actually going to come up in the next thing that we're going to talk about. So we'll get to that in just a minute. But while you're here, if you're watching on YouTube, I want to encourage you to go ahead and like and subscribe to our DawgNation YouTube page so you can get updates on any shows that we're doing, whether it's Before the Hedges, DawgNation Daily, On the Beat, DawgNation at Large, or any breaking news that we have. If you hit the subscribe button, you'll always get a notification anytime that DawgNation goes live on air, and especially since we're in that kind of commitment random season, you want to make sure you get those notifications. So make sure to like and subscribe to our DawgNation YouTube page. There's been some chatter. That's what Brandon calls it, the chatter about can Georgia land the #1 recruiting class even with some misses as of late. And these are going to be the 5 recruits that Georgia absolutely has to get if they are going to find themselves in the #1 spot. But we're going to do it quick 5 style. All right, put your 5s up. First one, familiar name. It has been Jeff's boy since like the dawn of time.
Baby Brock.
When you think about Georgia's most recent recruiting classes, typically they have a 5-star tight end because that's what Todd Hartley does. And for this class to be at #1, it can't be any different than it's been in the past. So it starts with Mark Bowman.
Yeah, I think if you had to say who's the most
Likely?
important 5-star for Georgia to sign, it's got to be Mark Bowman. Close considerations for the next guy on this list. But Kaylee had a great idea for this segment. She's like, Jeff, let's build a roadmap for how Georgia signs the #1 class. First of all, a clarifier. I went through the class calculator on 24/7 Sports. It's a very handy feature. And I said, okay, these are the best players I think Georgia can sign. And I went through 15 names to get to 25 commitments. And that would give Georgia a 311 composite score. That's pretty good. Mm-hmm. The best ones pre-NIL era, pre-revenue share era were around 327, 325. Nobody's going to get into that territory anymore when they sign 10, 11 5-stars in a class. But I put them all together, and Georgia got to 25 commitments. And that was a 312 score, I believe. Well, Kaylee, USC is sitting right now at 285 with their 26 commitments. Now, USC, first of all, 12 of them, 11 of them actually are 3 stars, 14 are 4 stars, and they got 1 5-star. I don't think all of those will stick. Kirby Smart made some comments this week on the record at spring meetings down in Destin where Kirby said that there are schools out there, not in the SEC, of course. Kirby would never say anything about someone not in the SEC, but that they're paying young men $20,000 per month to commit and remain committed in this kind of uncapped kind of Wild West we're going on right there. And a lot of people might think, hey, that might be USC he's talking about right there, because we've seen it happen yearly with the Trojans. The other thing to think about is the competition in the way. And you've got Notre Dame who's sitting at 16 commitments. And I think I don't think USC is going to sign 40 high school players this year, even though that's some of the chatter going on around USC. And that's why they'll probably stay #1 if they keep that many or sign that many. But I think it all starts, like the road to the #1 class for Georgia starts with Mark Bowman.
Have you seen that recent? It's kind of like a viral trend on social media, and the topic is like propaganda I'm not falling for.
Yeah.
Okay, well, USC ends up with the #1 recruiting class is propaganda I'm not falling for. Anyway, so let's move on. I don't want to go down that hill. Tyler Atkinson is #2 on the list, and this is a can't miss one, not just for the purpose of having the overall #1 recruiting class, but the amount of time and effort and dedication that Georgia's put into Tyler Atkinson, especially with him being an in-state kid and as much outreach as other Georgia players have had with Tyler Atkinson. Like, not only do you need him to be in that #1 spot, but you can't spend that much time with a guy and not land him somehow.
Going to be interesting, Kaylee, because Clemson is right there with with Atkinson now, I think Texas is want to try to sign him. Oregon will, obviously. USC, you're hearing rumors now about USC is trying to pair him up with Jakeem Stewart.
Propaganda I will not fall for.
Propaganda. Well, yeah, we need to make a side bet, like a side hustle with Kaylee here on the show. We need to keep receipts. Like she'll have to wear some elaborate costume for the whole show. If she maybe a USC Trojan head or something like that,
No.
she'll show up dressed like a USC Trojan if the Trojans do hold on to that title. But here's what's the formula for getting a number 1 overall class? It's usually 5 stars, but at the minimum, you got to have top 50 players. Right now, Georgia only has 1 top 50 player. That's why Bowman and Atkinson are essential. We all know how great a player he is, but I'm going to say this as succinctly as I can. I think Bowman and Atkinson are the 2 most risk-free players in the 2026 class. What do I mean by that? You can pay them a whole bunch of money. They're still going to work. They're still going to thrive. They're going to be all SEC. They're going to be all American one day. I think my percentage of confidence behind making a statement like that, I feel better about those 2 guys being the real deal in college football than anybody else in the class.
All right, so the next guy on the list is going to be another in-state guy that we just talked about, and of course that's 5-star tight end / wide receiver Caden Prothro. Another one of those where you feel like Georgia's always kind of had a hand in the pot. They just need that extra push.
Yeah, and you wonder somebody might make a good point in the comments. I'll look for it. But they're going to say, hey, if you get Bowman, how's that going to affect Prothro? Well,
he's more of a receiver type anyway.
He's probably going to end up more like Noah Thomas than he was the Brock Bowers role at Georgia. You see him right there. He predominantly lines up at wide receiver in almost every phase of his high school career when he goes to camps, the Under Armour camp. I don't think that will affect because I think the only way Caden Prothro is going to be an every down tight end is if he weighs 250, 260 in college, and that means he's got 40 more pounds to grow and to go right there. And again, it's one of those things where for Georgia to get a number 1 class, they're going to have to take these kind of easier degree of difficulty commitments and signings. And I think Prothro is one of those guys that they could win, they should win, and they probably have to win to have a top 3 class.
Well, the next one was a little bit more on the difficult side because we just basically went by position instead of specific name because the running backs this year have been a little bit odd. So Georgia's going to have to get a 5-star running back one way or another. The good thing is they have options. You've got people like Savion Hyder or Derek Cooper. Is there anybody else that could fall into this category that is a real possibility for Georgia?
So the reason I did this is kind of going to be one of those choose your adventure books from high school.
Oh, I love that.
When elementary school, when middle school, when you were reading those. So this one would give Georgia an out. What I mean by that, if you see the quick 5 list, what happens if Georgia doesn't get an Atkinson or a Prothro? I think Georgia can make up ground with either Cooper or Hyder, the 5-star running back. I think Jay Lamar is a guy we wrote about as well. I mean, he's a top 100 overall. He's 108 overall right now. I think he'll go up. Jay Lamar is the number 8 running back in the country. And one of the things we haven't seen over the last few recruiting cycles for Georgia is that top 10 type running back. The last one of those, you had Branson Robinson in 2022, number 1, number 2, number 3 for some services. And then you had Nate Frazier in 2024, but then you didn't have any in 2023. You didn't have any in 2025. And that's why I think, Kirby Smart's best teams have always had that one of those NFL guys at running back. And that's why I think, I think Lamar is going to be the in addition to of Georgia's road to the number 1 class. And if you get a Cooper or if you get a Hyder, now listen, Kaylee, Tennessee, war chest, Michigan, war chest. They're prioritizing Savion Hyder kind of the same way Georgia's doing Mark Bowman and Tyler Atkinson. So it's almost like you got to choose your spot. If you go hard in the paint for one of these guys, you got to rest assured that somebody else is going to have the spend and the priority for another guy that you really want as well.
Well, the last name on this list, and you kind of brought this up earlier, it's not that Georgia has to have every single person that signs be a 5-star in order for them to get that position. But sometimes it's those 4 stars that are still within the top 50 players. That's where Ekene Agboko comes in. Not a 5-star, but the 247 composite has him ranked at 40, and he's potentially one of those players that when they do the re-rankings at the end could end up in that 5-star position, kind of like Chris Cole a few years ago. So even though not a 5-star, would still help propel Georgia to that number 1 spot because of his top 50 ranking.
Yeah, this is one of those I would couch as saying this is one Georgia kind of has to win. Basically, because it's familiarity. This is Nnamdi Ogboko's younger brother. Nnamdi is a redshirt defensive lineman in Athens. There are no secrets about what the experience would be like for Ekene in Athens. And, I'm going to say this right now. This guy probably should be the highest rated offensive lineman Georgia signs. There's a lot of noise right now about Malachi Lee, the young man from Hawaii. Michigan is really in deep there as well with Lee. But, Ogboko is probably, the services see him as a swing tackle, as an interior offensive lineman. That's where he's rated. But Ogboko to Georgia, he's told me that Stacey Searle says you're a tackle. So Georgia's got to win that, a legacy type here that has a lot of familiarity with Georgia and is still rated that highly. I think Georgia's path to the number one class would also have to include maybe Ogboko, even more so than Malachi Lee.
Well, here's the thing. This is an ongoing story that it's going to take until signing day to see what happens. But, of course, we'll keep following it along here on Before the Hedges. So now we're going to focus on someone who is already signed to Georgia, and that's the 5-star linebacker Zayden Walker with Before the Hedges Next Generation series. I will say it is crazy just across the board how many top 4-star and 5-star prospects we've had to talk about here on our Next Generation series. And of course, today is going to be the 5-star linebacker Zayden Walker, Ellaville, Georgia, Slide County High School. You better get it right. 6'1", 212, number 22 overall, came in at number 1 out of his entire position. Now, here's the thing about Slide County, and I feel like this is where some people are going to get the misconception wrong, is Slide County, yes, small school, successful program, but there are some people that say that having top tier skills at a smaller program doesn't always translate over to the collegiate D1 SEC level. Yeah. That doesn't necessarily apply to Zayden Walker, I think.
I think it's funny. Can we flash back to that player card right there?
Yeah.
There's a joke here somewhere forming here for Zayden Walker, and that's like, look at this right here. This is a busy street right here in Ellaville right here when you look at his player card, because like there's one person on the street right now, and that's a very busy for tiny Slide County. And I think all those questions were kind of maneuvered, Kaylee, by what Georgia got to see during bowl practices. Heck, we even got to see him during bowl practices, and the way he was moving around, the way he just looked like a Georgia linebacker. I believe he's in the 230s right now in Athens, and he's one of those guys that I've written this recently on DawgNation. If you don't get Tyler Atkinson this year, is that a loss? Of course it's an L in the recruiting trail, but Zayden Walker, look how he fills out that uniform, very athletic. He was the number 1 linebacker in just the previous cycle. So it's like you still going to have a guy that's going to play in Athens for the next 2+ years. Look at the way he drops. He's very athletic. He finds the ball. Kaylee, here's my absolute 2 favorite things about Zayden Walker. Number 1, he took his official visit to Georgia right around this time a year ago on that interesting May 30th weekend. He's like, I'm done. I don't need to go anywhere else. I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to sit there and hang out with my team. I want to soak up Ellaville. The other thing he did throughout his career, I mean, he's the best player on the field, and it's 1A football in Georgia. So they've made him a running back. They've let him score a goal line. They've let him rush the passer. He's mostly been an edge and not an inside-the-box, off-ball linebacker in high school. So that's kind of his biggest adjustment. Just you got to get all those reps playing it. But, Kaylee, this senior year, he was a receiver for Slide County. And we've put this on Before the Hedges before. I think not only was he a receiver, this wasn't a gadget. This wasn't a way to get him blocking out on the perimeter for the other guys on the team. Kaylee, I want to say he caught like 40 balls, 30 balls for like 400 yards. Kaylee, this is a linebacker catching the balls like that, looking that athletic. Very bright future in Athens for Zayden Walker because, he's been handpicked by Schumann for the longest time, and Schumann's been in his ear. And this was a guy, Georgia, one of the bigger wins of the 2025 recruiting class. And can't really believe it's taken us this while to get to him. But Georgia had the number one defensive tackle, the number one edge. They had the number one linebacker. They had the number one tight end. They had ends up being the number 4 receiver in Talon Taylor. So a lot of guys to churn through right there. And I mean, I'll tell you, look at him right there. Look at the way he chops. Look at the way he finds the ball. He's going to be a good one in Athens.
So here's the thing, though, is the current Georgia linebacker room right now is stacked with C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, Justin Williams, Chris Cole. Where does Zayden Walker fit in with this group as a freshman?
I think you're going to see what you saw out of Chris Cole and Justin Williams last year. Everybody moves up a rung, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jalen Walker moves on. Chaz Chambliss, who took some outside linebacker reps, he moves on. So you'll see Cole move out there. You'll see Cole do some of those Jalen Walker things, and then somebody moves up. And I think that would be maybe a Justin Williams and then somebody else. I mean, the main thing you're going to look at is Zayden this year is hopefully playing in the second half of a lot of blowouts.
That's true.
Marshall, Tennessee Tech, other schools like that on the home schedule this year. And you're also going to see a lot of special teams play for him first off, because that's what Georgia linebackers do. That's what Nakobe had to do a little bit. That's what Chris Cole and Justin Williams had to do. That's what C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson had to do. So you see that, and you see eventually there's just a process. There's tiers you got to go through, and I think Zayden Walker is going to fit in very nicely in Athens.
I've got a new question for you. Because it is such a stacked room, who could you see him learning best under in the current room? Who do you think he can take a lot away from?
I think he needs to look a lot and follow the Chris Cole plan, simply because you think about what he does best. Some of that stuff that he's shown on tape, Kaylee, is rushing the passer, coming off the edge, his natural burst, his explosion, his ball get off, and his quickness. Now, that's not going to be his bread and butter at Georgia, but that's something he can do to kind of stay on the field in nickel situations. So you could say Chris Cole, you could say Jalen Walker, because there are a lot of those similarities in terms of skill set. Maybe it doesn't have the twitch that Jalen Walker did, but we got to remember 3 or 4 years ago, Kaylee, Jalen Walker was not recruited as an edge. He was recruited as a linebacker. And, you see with Raylan and CJ, and it's just SEC football, Kaylee, you're going to get one of those top tier linebackers busted up, and then everybody's kind of going to move up the food chain a little bit.
All right, so that's going to be our next generation series, all about the 5-star linebacker, Zayden Walker. Now we're going to move into our class breakdown. We'll go through the positions pretty quickly because we do have a lot of movements on the top targets list. So we'll go ahead and show you the defensive side of the ball remains the same. You've got the 3-star defensive lineman, Seven Cloud, hopefully. And then you've got 3 safeties in Zach Fort, Keelan Jones, as well as Jordan Smith. He moved to the offensive side of the ball. You add a new name to the list. You can see that the 2026 class is really getting offense heavy. You add another wide receiver in Ryan Mosley alongside Brady Marchese and Vance Spafford. If you want to move to the class snapshot, the only things that change, of course, Ryan Mosley is an in-state commit, so now there's 5 commits from the state of Georgia. You add an extra top 200 commit, and Georgia goes from number 16 to number 11 in the class rank. Now, if you want to move to our top targets, okay, some new names, some drops. So now Shadarius Tootle, the 4-star linebacker that's currently committed to Auburn, he comes from just off the list to the top targets, as well as the 4-star linebacker Nick Abrams. I feel like the fact that now you've got 2 more linebackers on this list, maybe Jeff's trying to throw a little hint our way. And then you've got Tyreek Green, who drops a couple of spots, seemingly because Georgia already has 3 safeties in that class. It makes it a lot more difficult to try to create room for yet another safety when you've got other obligations to fulfill.
Kaylee, I feel like that scene in Old School when the Will Ferrell character, goes into a trance and
Yes.
and he's like, and then he's like, and he finishes it and he goes, and then James Carville looks over and he's like, I have nothing to add. Kaylee, I have nothing to add. That was perfect. That was a perfect breakdown of the number 10 through 15 of the 11 through 15 of our top targets.
Okay, well then I guess that we can just go ahead and go to our next page. So most of these guys are just guys that have moved up based on importance. You've got the 4-star offensive lineman Malachi Lee, who you spoke about earlier, as well as the 4-star wide receiver Craig Dandridge. I feel like he's someone that's been on our radar, but as of recently, you're seeing his name a lot more. You're hearing his name a lot more. Is that just because the relationship between him and Georgia has gotten stronger?
Kaylee, he's really, really, really good. And I'm going to give you guys a little pearl here. Like we're not trying to show favoritism, but sometimes this stuff reaches. We don't mind it when stuff reaches Before the Hedges, before it reaches DawgNation.com. Do you have any objections about that? So Coley went to visit Dandridge recently, and this is a good story. And he literally saw him work out, saw him on the grass, and he literally is going to his car, right? And he's like, I gotta have him. I gotta have him. I gotta have him. And I don't know whether he's trying to rub a magic lamp like Aladdin and say it 3 times and make it come true like it's a Stephen King novel or something like that. But Dandridge, the word for him is like smooth, like Carlos Santana type smooth. I'm talking about right there. Monster junior year. You see Mosley joining the class. This is the other receiver that I think Coley, like we just said, has got to have right there. And I'm going to give you a little clarity here right now. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 names here. 6 names, excuse me. No, they're 5
names.
They're 5. Let me make sure. I'm a journalism major, but I can still count. Georgia probably should sign at least 4 of these guys. If they can go 5 for 5 here, this would be the bulk of what they need to do to have the best possible class. But Lucky, you think you can do. Dyer, Georgia's prioritized him. Dandridge. Now, Dandridge has got 5 other schools. He might even go to Stanford. Kaylee, he's that smart. Tech likes him. Clemson didn't make his final 6, which is interesting there, but really sharp dude, really good practice player, Dandridge. Ogboko, we talked about him and the pathway to how to get to the nation's number 1 class. And as I mentioned earlier, Malachi Lee, that's just going to be really tough. Michigan has kind of been recruiting him harder and longer. And we got to admit, Michigan is putting top-tier offensive linemen into the league. They're getting drafted in the first round. So it basically means, does a young man from Hawaii, does he want to live in the American South, or does he want to go live up in frozen Michigan winters?
No, that's where my head goes too. That's just such a big adjustment. All right, let's just go ahead and take a look at the top 5 here. So now, because Ryan Mosley commits, Jay Lamar, the 4-star running back, takes his place. I kind of like the angle that you were taking on the last group. Here's the top 5. At number 1, you've got Mark Bowman. Number 2, you've got Tyler Atkinson. 3, Kamari Brooks. 4, Caden Prothro. 5, Jay Lamar. Realistically, how many of these guys can Georgia sign?
I think 4 is probably the number you're looking for. I'm sure everybody.
Then who's the outlier?
Oh, I think Atkinson is just going to be really tough there, Kaylee. I mean, I think it just is. I think Atkinson, props to him. He's going to be probably the highest paid linebacker signee ever, inside linebacker signee ever, because he's deserved it. And I think, how do you fit that with needs? I think Zayden Walker is a guy you balance there with Georgia. I just think back to, this is nothing against Tyler. Great kid, would automatically help Georgia and help Georgia kind of, as we wrote this week, kind of have those chokehold defenses that they're really known for, those sleeper hole defenses. But if you ask me, I always reference what I see on the field, Kaylee. And I remember last year, and I remember Georgia not having enough playmakers at tight end, wide receiver, and running back, just scraping to try to get plays made, right? And yet they had Raylan Wilson, former 5-star linebacker. They had Chris Cole, a former 5-star linebacker. They had Justin Williams, a former 5-star linebacker. And all those guys weren't really impacting the game yet because probably they were just really young. But you think about your resources now, Kaylee, and you think about, do you need to spend that money on a 5-star linebacker who's going to be all SEC wherever he's at, likely an All-American wherever he's at, likely a first or second round pick wherever he's at? Does Georgia need that as much as they need more sticks of dynamite? I'm starting to call it, Jared Curtis right now is the arrow right now for Georgia. He is the bow, right? Now, this whole class to me looks like the most successful class Georgia can build is getting enough arrows for Jared Curtis to do some damage to SEC defenses. When I mean amplify, I mean giving him weapons, giving him the ability to tear through defenses. I think you got to wonder about how much you can spend. Like if you lose on Mark Bowman, then obviously I think those funds should go to Tyler Atkinson. I think that's not I think right now, Kaylee, the way I want to say this is I don't know if it's any longer Georgia gets both Mark Bowman and Tyler Atkinson anymore. I think it might be one or the other.
Well, it's a lot of money to spend and a lot of time and attention you have to put into two top prospects. Let's go ahead and move on to our just off the list. We talked about earlier having to have a 5-star type running back. With the 5-star athlete, Derek Cooper, they could get that. But he was someone that was initially on our top targets. Now he's on our just off the list. Like, would it just specifically take money, or does Georgia have to show a greater interest in him, or is there a focus on Savion Hyder?
I think it's a lot of that. You kind of clicked a lot of the notes there, but I think the hardest thing you can say here for Georgia to keeping Georgia from getting Derek Cooper is Miami is going to spend, and Miami is in the backyard. Mm-hmm. Remember, Derek Cooper was committed to Georgia for a brief moment while his mother was asleep.
That's right.
So you sit there and you go, well, Kaylee, I'm going to try to be very as transparent as I can. If things don't work out with Prothrow, if things don't work out with Atkinson, if things don't work out with Bowman for whatever reason, kind of like the way it did with Jackson Cantwell, then some of that spend, some of that earmarked money would go to other players. And so okay, Georgia doesn't have the explosive tight end arrow for Jared Curtis with his bow right now. Okay, well then you need to go find him another explosive arrow, and that might be the Savion Hyder or it might be a Derek Cooper.
All right, now we'll move on to our next page of just off the list. We talked about Justice Fitzpatrick earlier being one of those guys that is going to take an official visit to Georgia this weekend. Let's talk about 3-star linebacker Kedrick Golston II out of Virginia, because if Tyler Atkinson doesn't commit to Georgia, you have to start looking at all of your options. A 5-star linebacker, chances are, is not going to be the case. You need to find those quality 4-star, 3-star guys. Could somebody like Kedrick Golston II kind of fill that role if Tyler Atkinson doesn't end up at Georgia?
Interesting you pull that name. I don't know if you remember, his dad was a Dawg a generation ago. His dad's actually a high school football coach now in Virginia as well for the Stonebridge Bulldogs of all people. But Kedrick is going to take his official visit. Tennessee had him in town last weekend. Sounds like there's a lot of love there. But Georgia kind of sees him right now as an outside backer, or maybe one of those guys that can do a lot of both. So that's going to be very interesting. You got to think about this recruiting class and how hard it gets now. Well, if you can, I don't want to say come to terms, but if you can take your wins that are there, like a legacy linebacker, then that's a win you've got to take in terms of it gives you the wiggle room to kind of fight those tooth and nail barroom brawls for some of these other recruits in the class.
Yeah, and he's going to take his visit to Georgia, it looks like on June 13th.
Yep.
All right. Oh, okay. You have anything else to add?
I would just say you bring up June the 13th, Kaylee. The point I wanted to make earlier in our show is there's only one other weekend in this cycle, in this month, that will be more important for the Dogs than this weekend. And that will be June 13th, because that's when you have like Zach Fort, Vance Spafford, Mark Bowman, Jared Curtis. All those guys are taking their official visits to Georgia that weekend. And you've got priority targets, you've got commitments there as well, and some guys that Georgia really needs to close out with.
All right, and we'll move on to our next page. So we got a new name and a name that has been taken from the top targets to just off the list. Desmond Green comes on to just off the list, and James J.J. Johnson, the 4-star defensive lineman, he falls.
Yeah. What we talked about earlier, I think Georgia's going to have their eBay auction paddle up a lot for James Johnson. There's nothing wrong with it. These players deserve it. If they can get it, more power to them. The one name I want to show up, there's a little bit of news here. Kenneth Godwin. Again, we've talked about him. He's a linebacker. He's out of California now, but he was in the Las Vegas area. He's the nephew of Georgia assistant running backs coach David Hill. You know, that sweat equity check Sundays and everything else like that. So he just dropped the top 4, Final Four. Looks like Georgia's in that group. He is also, Kaylee, going to make his commitment on July the 1st. So we're seeing a lot of names pop up. A lot of dates are already coming up. Jay Lamar is June 25th. Kenneth Godwin's June the 1st. You got Nick Abrams June the 16th. You got a lot of these guys. Preston Carey June the 30th. There's already a pretty good list we could spackle together. Maybe we need to do that on the website, or maybe we need to do that on the show next week about all the commitment dates that are already kind of getting marked down here.
All right, we've got one more page of just off the list to show you. What about five-star edge Dre Quinn? We haven't talked about him in a while. Is he potentially a guy that could be someone that helps propel Georgia to a number one recruiting class too?
Yeah, Quinn's a guy that's rankings have kind of fluctuated a little bit out of Greater Atlanta Christian. I believe he's currently a 4-star now on all the composites right there, but you see him as a guy, if Georgia could have their ideal edges. Recently, Xavion Griffin-Haynes, you remember that name? He dropped down to a Final Four. Georgia did not make the list. You know, what does that say to me? You have another reclassified 2027 to 2026. That says to me that he wasn't the priority for Georgia. Dre Quinn, Kamari Brooks, those guys are the priority at edge for Chidera Uzo-Diribe in this class. Tamarian Watkins, we've talked about him before. Georgia's hoping to convert him to backer. He's ranked as a safety. One name we want to make sure we kind of speechify here a little bit, Breck Kolojay. He's down at IMG Academy. Preston Carey was telling me about him. Super guy. Hardworking, always goes hard, relentless motor guy. But Kaylee, this is, again, another guy that's probably a top 250, top 280 prospect in the country. He's an interior offensive lineman. Kaylee, the film looks great. There's no weaknesses in his game. He is a football player. He's played at a very high level. I think those are the guys that Georgia really needs to clean up with for spots maybe 15 or 18 to 24, 25 of this class.
All right, so that's going to wrap up today's episode of Before the Hedges, brought to you by Kroger. I'm Kaylee Mansell with Jeff Sentell. We'll see you right back here next Wednesday for all things recruiting at 7 o'clock.